talk to you. I don't know what that was. I'm not really technologically savvy either. So when robots start talking to me, it kind of freaks me out a little bit. But with that, I think there are people who are talking to you this week who have massive bags of tricks, and bags of tricks in my brain are like different tools and strategies and equipment and such that are helpful for teaching kids in schools. I see Rob here. I've gotten to know Rob fairly well over the last few years. I think he's got a very large bag of tricks that if I tried to compare my bag to his bag, I probably would look pretty unqualified. And so instead of bags of tricks, what I like to talk to teachers about more so is thinking about why we do what we do and the decisions that we make. And perhaps this is a bit more of a space cadet mindset. And I have been accused of being a space cadet in the past, but I do think that it's important information for us to think about when we talk about teaching kids with disabilities in schools. And largely what I have interest in and what I'm passionate about is centering the voices of kids with disabilities with decision making that we're doing in the schools that affects them. And so one of the questions I ask often is, why don't people with disabilities have a say in what's happening in schools? And I think that really applies to adapted PE. And so, oh man, Dew just entered the waiting room. Made me think I entered the waiting room when I saw that pop up. And so with that, today I have these two objectives. I do have you guys can see the screen I'm sharing, correct?
Yes.
All right, I love to see the amount of engagement. So I teach undergraduate students and I teach them using Zoom now, which I hate strongly, but I do like to test engagement by asking those quick prompt questions to see if people nod their head or not. I'm sure you do the same thing now that we're all on Zoom in one way or another. But I do have my Twitter handle on here because it seems like Twitter is becoming like the way to connect with people. But if you want to contact me, and I think this reflects what Sheila and Jillian were saying prior to the presentation, like I love meeting people and learning from people in the schools. I learn more from you all than you're probably going to learn from me. But I love that interaction. It's pretty critical for higher ed to make any sense, for me to have a relationship with teachers in schools. So if you guys listen to this today and you think, wow, this stuff he's talking about sounds interesting, let's connect, great. Or if you think, man, what he's talking about, not interesting at all, maybe he should know that, feel free to tell me. Shoot me a tweet on Twitter and let me know either it was great or you should stop doing stuff like this. But here are the two objectives that I have for today. I want to talk a little bit about what inclusion is. This is one of my favorite conversations to have, and it's a bit of a contentious conversation to have, particularly with higher ed faculty around the country. And so people have different opinions about this, and I'd like to share with you an opinion that I have. And then I want to talk to you about, I will not just talk to you about, I want to do some reflecting as a group about the role that students' voices play in understanding experiences of inclusion in classes. And perhaps these conversations can help influence the way in which we think about what inclusion is and what subjective experiences are and such. And so, yeah, let's just jump into this. And so I started thinking about inclusion a lot. This is a picture of me in a suit, which doesn't happen very often. But I started thinking about inclusion a lot a few years back. I was talking to my wife, who again is a special education teacher. And she taught both in self-contained classes and integrated classes. And she's taught in New York and in Ohio. She's had to teach in a bunch of different places as we've moved around. And she's also, and so she was teaching in an integrated class. And so I use the word integrated, and I'll explain this a little further to talk about placements. And she's teaching in this class, and she's talking about how the kids don't seem to be having an enjoyable time. And she's asking me a question about like the word inclusion and how is it possible that inclusion is this thing that we're constantly striving for, but we place kids together in the same place and the kids aren't necessarily having a good time or enjoying the class. And so the question becomes, how is this thing that's supposed to be inherently positive not always positive? And then we reflected back to our teaching. So my wife and I met while we were both teaching in this self-contained school for kids with autism in New York, where we had really profound relationships with families and the kids enjoyed themselves, or we perceived the kids to enjoy themselves. And we said, if inclusion is inherently good and self-contained is inherently bad, why is it that we found the experiences we had in these self-contained classes to be really positive and the kids to have nice gains, whereas in the integrated classes, it wasn't really the case. And so I started to think a lot about what is inclusion. I started to go back to literature and scholarship about what inclusion is and why we use the word inclusion. Why do we push the word inclusion? Because that's what we do, we push it. Not necessarily you all, but I think the academics out there love to say the word inclusion and use the word inclusion as a tool to try to guide their own agendas and such. And so we spent time in the last few years conceptually redefining the word inclusion. And so in the past, inclusion has been used with this idea of integration interchangeably. Essentially, integration is the placement, the physical space in which people with and without disabilities are in the same place. And so we've written a lot of scholarship in this area at this point. I'm happy to share that scholarship with all of you, but usually that bores people. But the idea is to conceptually separate the placement from what inclusion is. So then we can question whether the placement is inclusive or not. And I know, Justin, you're not even telling us what inclusion means. You're just saying the word inclusion over and over again. And so in the new conceptualization of what we believe inclusion is, it's a subjective experience from the perspective of the person being included that is driven by a sense of belonging, feeling accepted, and feeling valued. And so us feeling included is what inclusion is about, not being included. And being included is the proverbial, we place kids with and without disabilities together so that they are included. But we're referring to that as integration. In the past, people have referred to that as mainstreaming. But I think integration separates from mainstreaming because mainstreaming had a negative connotation back in the 80s and early 90s. And so now that we've conceptually separated integrated placements and inclusion as a feeling, it allows us to ask questions about whether or not kids are feeling included in integrated settings. Did I lose anybody yet? Good, I like this. No, this is simple, perfect. Let's see. So the second sentence here essentially just reinforces what I said before, where being included in these being educated in these integrated classes, you see these words just get muddied together, but being educated in integrated classes doesn't guarantee an inclusive experience. And also, I should say, being educated in classes that aren't integrated doesn't reframe you from experiencing something that could feel inclusive. And so I think things like the Big Feet meet could elicit feelings of inclusion. Why couldn't it? Or self-contained PE classes. And I think self-contained PE classes have become a bit of a dinosaur, largely because people are so focused on inclusion that they think that self-contained classes perhaps aren't appropriate. But if you believe that inclusion is a subjective experience associated with a sense of belonging, acceptance, and value, why can't kids feel those things in a self-contained class? This is one of the biggest disconnects I have with other academics in adapted PE around the world, in that they don't want to accept the fact that inclusion can happen in places that aren't integrated. I think that's fascinating because I think it shows bias, or perhaps like years of agenda. But so what does this mean for educators? In my opinion, this actually provides a good degree of freedom for educators to think about different placements as being appropriate. I also think, though, it means that we need to think a little differently about how we understand whether or not a kid is included. And so I know this isn't you all because it's summertime and you guys are in workshops, but I think lazy teachers, and I'm not saying you guys are lazy, clearly you're not lazy. One of you is green, none of you are lazy. But clearly, to me, it means that we need to talk to the students, right? We need to engage with the students to see how they're feeling about what we're doing. And I think people like you who are clearly engaged are the ones that could figure out ways in which to talk to students, to ask them their opinions about how the classes are going for them. And this is the research line that we're doing here at ODU, is we're talking to people with disabilities about what it's like to be in integrated classes and self-contained classes, to see what they think about physical education and whether they feel included within those classes. It's really fascinating stuff, especially if you're a space cadet like me. So a little more context to understand if classes are inclusive. First, we must consult, as I said, the participants with and without disabilities who are within those classes. we can't rely on the opinions of others. And so if we look at the research base in general in adapted PE, and by research base, I mean the research that informs the practice that us higher ed folk do or teach teachers to do when they're in teacher training programs. Typically, it's based on parents' opinions or teachers' opinions. And I think that's really silly, right? Like, hey, teachers, here's this practice that's based on your opinion to go do with kids. It leaves the kid out of the conversation completely. It's fascinating. We also can't rely on objective checklists. And so I'm sure you all have seen out there in the Twitter sphere, there are some checklists, observational checklists, or inclusion rating scales, perhaps, that teachers fill out, and they look at a class and they say, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. It's inclusive. Well, with this conceptualization of inclusion, it doesn't really work that way, because you're not excavating information from the kids, right? You're kind of just looking at this blanket area. And I've talked to a few people who have created these rating scales. And one of the things I've said to them often is, how could you say that just because kids are doing the same thing, that kids feel accepted or that they belong or that they feel valued? I've seen two kids in a line next to each other, standing there, one kid with a disability, one without, where the kids are picking on each other or punching each other. And maybe you won't see that. You won't see picking on each other or verbal teasing and such from an observational rating scale. But if you talk to the kids, you might see it. And so the analogy I like to use a lot is when you rely on the stakeholders' opinions or you rely on these objective rating scales, you're essentially allowing chefs to write reviews on Yelp, and then you're making your restaurant decisions based on the chef's opinion. And I don't think that's stuff that you would do. If there was a Yelp where restaurant owners got to tell you how great their restaurant was, would you go to those restaurants? Ohio State guy says. But as educators, basically what we're doing is we're saying the practices I use are wonderful, so the kids should love these. It's kind of the same thing to a degree. So more value of the kids' voices. And I'm sorry that my eyes are going forward and then going to the right. I have two screens, and so I have my slides on my right screen, and then I have you guys in front of me. And I say guys a lot because I'm a New Yorker. So unfortunately, like I was saying, most of the research that's out there that's developing practices, that's going into textbooks, even though most textbooks aren't really based on anything, they're mostly developed with research that's about people with disabilities rather than with the voices of people with disabilities. And so again, this means that people with disabilities and their opinions are absent, and decisions about practices do not include their input. And so some of the benefits of using, or not using, but listening to the voices of kids with disabilities include learning about how they experience specific lessons, what activities they believe works best for them and which do not, why activities work well for them, what they gain from activities, how we could improve our lessons, and of course, how inclusive their experiences are. Also, we can understand things like, was an activity modification helpful, or did it hinder in some way? Does the student enjoy peer assisted instruction, or do they prefer to work alone? And so, like as a teacher, I remember making a ton of assumptions. You know, I'm thinking, hey, I saw this modification somewhere. This works for kids with autism. I'm going to use it, without thinking like, hey, I'll talk to the kids and see if they like this, you know? And maybe it's different for each kid, right? Maybe some kids love it, maybe some kids hate it. But I think that as teachers, like there's this behavior that like I remember having, which was, you know, I'm an expert. I need to be the expert and I need to do these things. I'm imparting knowledge on these children. And I think, thinking back, I think that was a really disappointing mindset that I had, where I think that I would have enjoyed more co-constructing their educational experience with them. Like, why do I need to be the expert on them? They should be the expert on them. I'll bring my knowledge on activities and such, and then together we can create what their classes can look like. I think I was reading, this is a little off task, but I'm going to tell the story anyway. I was reading a thesis yesterday from a student up in Alberta about vulnerability in teaching. And I started to think, that's the key. If we as teachers can feel vulnerable about what we do and like feel comfortable being vulnerable, that our knowledge isn't expertise level. One of the light bulbs in my room just broke. But I think then we're more willing to change if we're more comfortable being uncomfortable. Whereas if our comfort is just in being the expert and providing knowledge to kids, then I think that we're limited in our ability to teach. Here's evidence as we're speaking. So with that, that's the long wind up to the activities that I'd like to do today. And so for the next hour, essentially, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you some of the information that I've gained from talking with people with disabilities about their experiences in PE. And the way I'd like to do it is I'd like to essentially share themes of quotes with you and a variety of quotes with you. And these come directly from young adults, typically with disabilities, and some children with disabilities. And I've organized them thematically to kind of tell a story to you. And I've got 5 different themes of quotes to share with you. And then after the quotes, I want to ask a couple of prompting questions, and I want to drop you guys into breakout rooms to answer those questions together and think about those questions. And maybe there aren't answers, maybe just more questions come. And the quotes aren't meant to represent every single kid in every single school in the entire country. They're only meant to represent those individual people's subjective experiences within PE classes. And so I say this, and I'm going to say the second sentence that's underlined is important as well, because the first time I did this in a workshop in Brazil with about 300 PE teachers in person. And I'm on the stage and I'm talking about this idea. And one of the teachers got really mad at me and said, "How can you tell me this is what my kids are experiencing?" And I thought, yeah, that is what I'm doing. And that's wrong. And so, like, you need to know that I'm not saying James Gunther's kid said this. I'm not saying any of your kids said this. I'm picking on James because I work with him a lot in Norfolk. I'm saying this is experiences that some people have had. And so perhaps they don't resonate with you, but perhaps they can help the way in which you think further about talking to kids with disabilities. So they're not meant to challenge you. I'm not here to start an argument, even though I do like to argue. But just an opportunity to think about and to reflect about PE. Does that sound like a fun plan? All right. So the first theme is called being put to the side. And so again, this is a collection of quotes, probably from interviews of about 200 or 300 young adults and children with a variety of disabilities that we've done since 2016. And so we've been compiling this data over the last 5 years only for the purpose of this one presentation. That was sarcasm. So the first theme, here are some quotes. The first one says, "I knew I was different from the other kids at an early age. There was a lot I couldn't do and I couldn't participate in, and the divide seemed bigger in PE than anywhere else." And I think that was a really bad thing, because I think it defined me for much of my life as not a physically active person. And that was a young blind adult reflecting back on his experience. And I use person first and identity first language back and forth quite a bit. Largely, I use identity first language in academic circles, but I understand that teachers are more comfortable with person first, mostly because we've reproduced person first language for decades. But identity first language is generally preferred among blind and visually impaired people. So anyway, it being excluded just made me feel kind of inadequate, is the second quote. Here's another one. Like I said, it was probably the least favorite part of my day, having to get dressed and just sit around and do nothing and watch everyone else run around and, have fun. This is a blind adult reflecting about being told to sit on bleachers while other kids participated because they were blind. When it was time for the kids to play basketball, volleyball, or whatever, the teachers, took me aside in the gym with another student, and we basically bounced the ball back and forth between each other. And this was an experience they reflected about being marginalized during PE. I actually envied my peers who could play sports and, you know, just run freely all over the gym and play the different sports in school because I enjoyed being active. But I was always kind of upset that I couldn't. And I felt very awkward much of the time because I couldn't. I was just sitting there watching and feeling envious. I think this is the last one. It would probably be said that in the teacher's opinion, that my choice to not participate in any given activity would be mutual. That we mutually decided that it was something that couldn't be accomplished, when really, I didn't feel like that was the case. I didn't feel like that was fully my decision, and I feel now that my instructor should have been a bit more responsible and try to create ways in which I could have participated. And so we're going to break out into small groups, 3 or 4 teachers, sorry. And here are the things I want you to think about. Are these perspectives that might represent some of the students in my school? What some of the students in my school believe? Is it my responsibility to fix these situations? And what strategies can we use to help alleviate some of these negative perceptions? So we're going to do about, I think 5 minutes is probably what we'll need to get a good conversation, a rich conversation about these 3. And I'll broadcast the message into the groups with these questions so that you can see them again. Noelle, are you saying you need 10 minutes? Are you saying raise the roof? Because I saw 2 hands go up, but I don't understand what the body language was. Okay, raise the roof it is.
Yeah, I was excited because I like when we can see the questions in our groups. It makes it easier. So I was celebrating.
Perfect. I'm all for celebrating. All right, let's do this. Breakout rooms. And we're gonna do, well, there are a load of you in here. I didn't realize there was almost 100 people in here. Now I'm more nervous.
Too late.
All right, so you got about 5 minutes. It's 8:56 on mine. Let's say 9:02 we come back and then we discuss. Sound good?
Hi.
Hi.
I see one person. I guess I'm missing. Oh, wait, okay, now I see. Oh, I didn't go to the breakout room?
Nope, you're still with me.
Oh, okay. Let me try to click that back again. The phone is different from the computer.
Dude, I think the breakout rooms times went quicker than faster than normal. That was no way 10 minutes. That was no way that was 10 minutes.
No way, that was too fast.
It was 7 minutes. I said 5, and then when Noelle threw up her 2 hands, I think I said the word 10, but she didn't actually seem like she wanted 10 at the time. But James, we've got lots more to talk about, so we'll see how the rest of them go. I try to build in a lot of time for reflection, because what else should we be doing other than reflecting after a long school year?
Need to reflect. It's important.
Yes, I agree. I think in only 8 years here, I've realized that my biggest mistake is not reflecting enough. And so now I just stare up at that corner of the ceiling and just think about whatever it is I'm thinking about pretty often.
Did they just put me in another group?
No,
At least that's what you think you're doing.
I was just in a group 19.
This is the whole mamma jamma here.
Oh, this is everybody now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, I just moved back, I guess.
So I think everybody's back. And so let's talk a little bit about these questions. Let's see what kind of responses that your groups came up with. And so do you all think that these perspectives, and I would say these are subtle perspectives thus far, are these perspectives that students in your school may share? Seeing some nodding, I'm seeing some reflection, some looking up at the ceiling. I like that. Some yeses. I also went through the chat beforehand, and somebody said I was doing great. So I don't know who that was, but thank you.
Brown nose.
That's probably true. And I think Gabriel says something in the chat right now that is probably really telling. And I think it's important that not everybody would share these opinions, right? But some may. And I think that's important. And yeah. One of the items that comes up a lot with inclusion, again, is we use inclusion as a blanket and we just apply it to everyone, right? We say everybody should be included. But, but do we ever think about the individual? So we talk about all these individual things in adapted PE, right? Like instruction should be individualized. We have an individualized education plan. Like we use that word a lot, individualized. But then we blanket things as well. Like inclusion is great for everybody. Everybody should be included, which seems kind of incongruent. And I like the word incongruent. I learned it from that movie, The Accountant, with Ben, what is that guy's name?
Affleck.
Ben Affleck, that's his name. I forget his second name because he intimidates me. But anyway, so we admit, though, that some students in our schools may share these perspectives. Some, not all of them, clearly not all of them, especially not for you, because you all, again, are the cream of the crop in Virginia, considering school's ended, and for some people it hasn't ended, as I think Wendy said in the chat. So not everybody's out of school yet. I'm sorry for that. But for a lot of us, we are. But admitting this, I think, is a good thing, because it says to me that we're comfortable with being vulnerable, meaning we're comfortable that perhaps all of the kids that we're working with don't feel included all the time, which means that we can improve more, which I think is a good thing. And so whose responsibility is it to help? And I'm really sorry, I can't keep up with all the chats, because I think the chat is awesome. And I'm going to reflect and read through these later, but I'm going to do my best to read all of them. But it'll really distract me, I think, if I try to read them now. But so whose responsibility is this? And feel free to unmute and yell it out. You could tell me it's my responsibility if you want, but I think that's probably not true. It's probably somebody else's. Since I
think it's a dual responsibility, because as the chat's kind of reflecting right now, like sometimes we have to push students to be in uncomfortable situations because that's real life. So our students who may, have loved PE only in the 3 of us in the gym, playing a sport of their choice all the time, like might be great, but then being able to experience going to a loud gym and watching a basketball game, or going and waiting to take our turn, or some of the other inherent things that are in PE all of the time that, when we don't have any inclusive or connectivity in that, then we can miss that opportunity too. So I think it's a double-edged sort of like asking the teacher to help facilitate it and then the student to help facilitate that give and take, because again, PE, as we all know, has so many other layers to it than just sports and making me active lifestyle. And I think sometimes we need to make sure that our students with disabilities or individuals with disabilities are challenged in those other elements that PE can provide.
Yeah, I think you make some interesting points there. I can't say your name. That's way too hard for me to try to pronounce.
Kelly. Just go with Kelly. It works better. Okay. Yeah.
But I think, so until recently, when people would respond to this, I'd always say, it's the teacher's problem. Teachers need to fix this. But then I was actually talking to an undergraduate class in University of Northern Iowa. And this student said to me, I think it's the kids' problem. The kids need to figure it out. And I thought, why did she say that? And I probably spent like 2 weeks thinking about this, which is like a bizarre amount of time to think about something that an undergraduate student says kind of haphazardly in a class. But I think it's a good point in that like there's these two aspects of this bidirectional relationship. There's the teacher who like is generally considered the knowledge holder and knowledge haver and knowledge sharer. But then there's also the child, and the child I think needs to advocate for themselves, and they need to be able to say, listen, Kelly, I don't feel good about this. Like I don't feel like I belong in this class. The atmosphere you're creating doesn't provide, and I'm not saying you, Kelly, but I'm saying in general. So I'm not attacking you, please. But I think if the child feels encouraged and has the support of the teacher to come to them and say things like, today in class, like my sense of acceptance, like it wasn't there. And maybe kids won't say acceptance. Maybe this is like language that's beyond a lot of the kids, but maybe they'll say, Miss Kelly, I felt really uncomfortable today, or I wasn't happy today. And then you can ask why, and they could say, the X, Y, and Z. And then like, that's such valuable information for us as teachers, I think. But I think with this bidirectional relationship, it's not just on the teacher, or it's not just on the child to come to the teacher. It's also on the teacher to create an environment where the child thinks, I can go to this teacher and I can say, today didn't work great for me. I think that is a terribly difficult atmosphere to construct too, that every child thinks I can go talk to my teacher like that.
And so, Justin,
yes,
our group, just to piggyback on, our group said there's more shareholders in this situation than just in the gym. And I feel like some of these things outside of our gym in the classroom, some of these skills could be taught elsewhere and practice. So then when they do get in situations with any resource or anything outside the classroom, they have the ability and confidence to work towards giving themselves a voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. And we've done now this type of presentation. So clearly I keep referring to other times we've done something like this, but we've done it now with classroom teachers as well, where we're talking to classroom teachers and saying, listen, like you need to help facilitate these same thoughts and feelings and experiences in your classroom, and then help build these skills in the classroom. Because if they're built in the classroom, they'll perforate, that's not the word, they'll leak into the gym. But I think of the gym as the place where things can change fastest, where we can make a difference fastest. And I also think PE teachers are the leaders of the school. Am I biased? Of course I am. But, that's what I think. I think there's nobody who can construct change faster than we can.
Yeah, along with Mac, when we write our IEP goals for our kids at our center, they're a cross-curriculum environment. So the goal should be able to transfer from the gym to the cafeteria, to the playground, to the classroom, wherever they're going, so we can all support each other in our goals, for the very fact that we can get more communication, finding out what the kids' likes and dislikes are, what rewards work best for them, so we can get them to communicate with us when they're in our space. And really beneficial. I really like that philosophy that we use.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the collaborative aspect of the school, when it actually works, when PE teachers aren't somewhere on the totem pole, maybe the totem pole doesn't exist. Maybe everybody's, respected equally, which is a whole other conversation we can get into, which is loads of fun. But I think when that occurs, I mean, it benefits the child. But I think it all comes back to that child voice that infiltrates whatever decisions the teachers are making. I think like going one other aspect when you speak of IEPs that is always on my mind, and I don't know how to facilitate improvement personally, is I know in our with IEPs, part of the team should be the child, but I also know that within most schools, the child's voice is rarely, if ever, included in those IEP meetings. And I think that's such a fascinating like decision from where adults are making decisions that they think are best for the child without the child's input.
So we do bring our kids into their IEPs. Either prior to, we talk about what their goals might want to be or what they see themselves going into, or they actually physically go into it. Some of our kids use tech talkers, so that takes them a while to find their choices and write them out. I have a daughter that has an IEP, and she articulates for herself. She's been going to her IEP since she was fifth grade. Wow. I've made because she has to have a say on what works for her. I think it's really important that they feel valued like that.
Yeah.
And some of our goals are actually advocate goals, you know, especially when I've got kids that are going to post-grad. I start working on that way early, because the earlier they learn those skills, the better they will be as they get older. But they have to advocate for themselves, and that teaching them no is a good word. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say that's not good. I don't like it. And then, but then you need to give me some feedback. What else works for you? This bell or this one, or this space or this space. Yeah. Hate to say it, but for many of the kids with special needs, the gym is the worst place to teach them. It's too much stimulation. It's too loud. It's too big. You know, that's our teaching space is against us.
Yeah.
There is two forms of communication that we have available to us. One is pod communication. And the starting phrase for pod communication is, I have something to say. It's picture generated. The other thing is, in the state of Virginia, we have the I Am Determined program, and it's based upon preferences. I start teaching it when a student walks in my classroom. And it's phenomenal for using and teaching a student to use their voice. Everything is the pod communication. Everything starts with, I have something to say.
I think that's
and so it's crucial to everything I do in my space.
Nice. No, I love that. And I think even that statement, starting with that statement, but still empowering them to talk directly to us as the service provider, and then us being open to change based on that voice. So like there's multiple components here, right? It's not only a voice, but it's also us and our receptiveness to that. I do want to move to the next question, because if we don't move to the next question, we will never get past this first set of prompts. And so, you know, I've got more stuff to share, and I don't want to deprive you guys. I will say though, I have nothing to do until 5:15 today. And so I'm happy to continue to do this until then. The last one is, well, we've talked about strategies already, given the different mechanisms for talking and including students in IEPs. So if you guys are all right with this, I think we move to this next theme. And I know earlier James criticized us for only 5 minutes, but I don't think he realized that 5 minutes was going to roll into 15 minutes worth of reflecting, right? I got the thumbs up from James. I'm good. James, did you win the APE Teacher of the Year award? Is that what that says?
No, I think that's from the past year, Justin.
Okay, because I know you had won it in the past.
Yeah, I think that's
how greedy you're going to be in trying to win this again.
No, sharing the wealth, brother.
Okay, and so here's the next theme. It's called Friends versus Peers. It is an amazing award, Tim. I agree. I'd like to see, this is again aside, I'd like to see who our Virginia AP teacher is go into winning the National AP Teacher of the Year award. So let's start aiming higher. No offense to James and Rob, who I know both are in here. You know,
I was going to say, we can give a shout out to Rob for Teacher of the Year as well.
Yep. I don't know if there are more in here, because I only know James and Rob. I don't know everybody.
Well, I know Jillian is nominated for this year, so I'll just throw that one out there.
Nice. Congrats, Jillian.
I can't believe she hasn't gotten it.
All right, so let's go to this next theme. The next theme is called Friends versus Peers. And again, this this takes on the social component of like the benefits of integrated PE. And so when people talk about inclusion, the very first benefit that people talk about is being with other kids, right? Oh, they're going to have socialization benefits. And to me, like, there's a lot of different aspects of this that's challenging to me, but let's read some of these quotes first. Am I not sharing the screen? Oh man, you're just looking at me in my office.
I thought it was just me.
No, it's my technological skills. Here we go. Friends versus peers. And so the first one says, PE lays people bare. It brings out more insecurities in things. In some ways, interactions with peers are very different from other interactions. The second one says, I spent so much of my childhood kind of left out of pairs and groups. You know, nobody wanted to work with the blind kid or the blind girl. There were times when I felt like, anybody want to be with me? You know, finally, there would be two people left, me and somebody else, and they would say, all right, I guess I will work with you. Here's a little longer of one. I think a lot of kids were frustrated with having me around because either they would get paired up with me and their experience in the gym class would be altered, or they would have to deal with having me around an activity that they thought I shouldn't be involved in. I think a lot of them did not enjoy having a blind guy around. They thought, oh, I have to deal with this blind guy. He's going to attach himself to me and I'm going to have to take care of him. That wasn't a great experience for me. It was always like they didn't want that guy on our team. You always get picked last, for example. Usually in our class, it would be this overweight guy and me last. I got into this situation once where the overweight guy got picked after me and he actually got mad at me. He said, I should have gotten picked before you. I have no idea how that happened. And I said, well, that's not my fault. That sort of situation was very difficult to deal with because kids will be heartless. And so let's talk about these social instances. And a lot of them have to do with groups and teams. And so we're going to jump back into breakout groups. I think you're probably going to end up in the same breakout group if I understand Zoom. But here are the questions for it. Are these perspectives, man, this is really poorly written. Do these perspectives, could they reflect in your students in your school? Do you think your students with disabilities experience social isolation or bullying? Is it my responsibility to fix these situations? And what strategies can we use to help alleviate these social issues? And I think point 2 or 3 and 4 will probably be answered together, given what happened the last time we were reflecting as a group. And so let's take another 5 minutes. We'll pop into our groups. It'll probably be more like 6 or 7 minutes, but probably 5 minutes. Let's see how ambiguous these directions are. Reflect on a few of these questions, and then let's come back and talk about it again. And we're gonna cap talking to probably 5 minutes or so that we can continue on. And then at the end, hopefully there's time for us to just have a conversation about some of this stuff. All right, breakout rooms. That's not the right button. That's not the right button. Oh my goodness. Here we go. Are you guys in your breakout rooms already?
I just opened it up for them.
Katie, I thought I was doing something without knowing I was doing it.
That's okay. This is Grace, by the way. Katie had to run and use the restroom, but I got it for you. Hi.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally was surprised there when people just started disappearing.
No, you're good. I just heard breakout rooms and I was like, oh, I'll open those up for him.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Textbook coming out in in PE specific to social emotional learning. I believe it'll be out this upcoming fall. Kevin Richards is one of the editors, so he's a pretty big name in PE scholarship. And there is an adapted PE chapter. And I know the people who wrote it, and I would say that 2/3 of those people are very good, and the other third is me. And so it should be okay. But with that, if you are working on the SOLs, I would champion inclusion as a subjective experience existing within the SOLs. But you know, that's not easy to do. Let's continue to move on to the quotes, because I do want to talk about this specific one because I think it's a very important one. I have 2 sets after this. If we don't get to both of those sets, I'm not going to lose sleep. You guys will have the slides to browse through, and then I am a resource for all of you. So, you know, I'm here in Norfolk, but, you know, email, Zoom and such, like I'm open to talking pretty regularly. But anyway, let's move to this next set of quotes. And so this one's called Teacher Perpetuating Peer Problems. And I think you all can probably guess what this one's about. And keep in mind, this is from the perspective of people with disabilities, not from the perspective of teachers. And so this one starts with, she, the PE teacher, would say things like, "Oh, Casey," that's not her real name. "You guys can't get the point because you stepped out of bounds." And those were embarrassing. Keep in mind, this is a person who's blind. Those were embarrassing and confusing experiences. When the peers were mean, they would just repeat what the gym teacher said. "Casey, you've got to pay attention. You got to try harder. Don't step out of bounds, just more pushy." And so the second one says, if an adult is treating this person differently, then we should treat them differently too. So the peers, are just taking the teacher's lead. And so again, these are people with disabilities reflecting about the role in which teachers played in perpetuating issues with their peers. "While playing basketball, my teacher ended up giving me candy because I made the basket, but she didn't do that for everyone else. It was kind of special attention. It didn't make me feel well because it showed everyone that I was different." Next quote, "This shined a spotlight on me being different, because my peers, weren't given a treat for making the basket." This is probably the worst one. "She, the PE teacher, would address us, Bruce, and his peers with disabilities, with a certain tone in her voice as if she was addressing people who were not normal. I think that she saw someone with a disability and just assumed that this person needed help or they needed attention. Because of their disability, they were unable to do things. So maybe that is why her voice went up and she talked as if she was talking to a child or a dog." And so we're going to do this one last time, go into the breakout rooms, because we're not going to have time to do it for the last 2. But let's jump in, talk for a quick 5 minutes. And I particularly want you to think about what these people with disabilities are saying about the way in which teachers are perpetuating social issues in their classes. All right, so should I do the breakout room, or is Katie going to do the breakout rooms this time? She beat me to it. All right. So I had a question in the chat from Devin, which I think is a really good question, where he asked, and I didn't get to read all of them, but I was asked whether or how we got all the quotes from the kids. Basically, there's a lot of quotes in here from children and young people with disabilities. How did we get those? These quotes were all received from research studies that we've done over the past 6 years. And so many of them are from people who are blind or visually impaired. Some of them are from kids with autism as well. We've also now done work, and these works will come out fairly soon, with people who identify as both trans and disabled. A lot of them are neurodivergent. We've also now done work with kids with orthopedic impairments as well. And we've done this type of work, not just here in the United States, but we've done it in the United Kingdom, South Korea, and Brazil. And so we're trying to bring together resources internationally, looking at the voices of people with disabilities. One of the other questions within that question was about how do we work with nonverbal students? And I'll actually show you an example of what we do fairly shortly. Not in the slideshow, it's something I definitely should have added, but what we have done is we've used two different techniques, one of which is to ask students to take photos of what they like around their gymnasium and then use those photos to elicit some sort of conversation. And another thing we've done is we've asked kids that have limited expressive language skills to draw pictures of what they think PE is like for them. And we've published those pictures as well. And so I can share some of those photos with you, those pictures with you afterwards. I'll quickly share a couple that came through in a recent study that we've done. But those are questions that I think are really important with regard to how do we engage with kids who may have limited expressive or receptive language skills. And those are things we're working on constantly. And also, and I'll throw this out there all the time, I'd love to engage with schools in Virginia with this type of work more so than we do already. We've got studies going on nationally right now where we're recruiting kids that are blind or visually impaired to conduct a year-long study where we're going to ask them what it's like transitioning back into in-person schools. And we have some kids from the state of Virginia participating, but not as many as I would have liked. So these are things we could do. We could partner up as larger groups and do some participatory work like that. Back to the content, at least that's in this slide. What do you think of these comments about teachers perpetuating social challenges for the kids? Now, I'm going to ask this question, and this is about vulnerability. Nobody's going to tell anybody, but do you think you may have at some point done any behaviors that may have perpetuated social issues for the kids you work with?
I'm going to speak up. And I told the group that, sorry, my camera doesn't work, by the way, that I totally did this when I was a new teacher. I taught elementary school and, they're babies to begin with in first grade. And I had a student with autism, and everybody in the class was kind of, babying and taking care of. And we thought this was like a kind thing. And I went to his classroom to help out, and he asked the teacher to open something. And she said, no, open it yourself. You've got it. And he turned to a kid and said, can you open this? And the kid was about to do it. And she said, no, he has it. And I thought, she's being so mean. Just open the thing for the poor kid just wants to have his snack. And then he opened it. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe, I'm, in this mindset where this kid needs everything for me to do. And that's how I show that I care and I'm helping him. And, flash forward about 20 years later, I now have a first grader with high functioning autism. And sometimes he's having a breakdown right now. Sometimes, my husband will baby him and I say, no, he knows how to do it. Let him do it. And he does it. So.
Awesome. Courtney, thank you first for being vulnerable and sharing an experience like that. I do think that is an instance of vulnerability in a good way. I don't mean that as people are vulnerable because they're weak, but more so because they're strong, because they're willing to share things that they grow from. And I think you provide a great example. And I think that this reflects the reason a lot of us get into the field of adapted PE or special education. It's because it's an altruistic activity or profession, right? We're doing good because we're doing good. And sometimes we want to, help kids perhaps more than they need help. And that's one of the other things that's constantly on my mind is when I'm behaving, am I doing things because I want to feel good about what I've done, or do I want to do things because it's what's best for the child? And I think those are different questions. And I think as professionals, we likely struggle with that more than we realize that we do. And so I really appreciate you sharing that story. I think it's a good one and a good representation of what we have here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move through because I have a few more thoughts of my own that I'd like to share. And then there'll likely be 5 minutes at the end, and we can have a general reflective time together if you'd like to just talk about, I suppose, the process and such. And so there are 2 more themes of quotes that are available in the PowerPoints. I believe Sheila and Jillian said that they share the PowerPoint slides. which is fantastic. And I'm also happy to share whatever writing that I've done with regard to these types of studies. Just need to shoot me a message and ask, and there's probably about 20 of them that I could send over whenever you all would like, various disabilities and countries and such. So a few things for moving forward, and one of the main messages I want to talk, or I try to talk to people about, is disconnecting this idea that a placement is inclusive, right? And I know, like, walking around school jargon is, you know, I have inclusive placements, but I think that that's a misnomer. And I think what it does is it allows us to not try to make kids have inclusive experiences, right? It allows us to say, hey, it's inclusive because they're together. But to me, that's not good enough. You know, I think that we need to come from a place where, you know, maybe they're together, but perhaps kids experience things differently, and we need to talk and engage with the kids to find out how they're experiencing different things. Personally, I think inclusion as a placement is a lazy proposition. And I don't think it's a PE teacher thing. I don't really think it's a teacher thing. I don't even really think it's an administrator thing. I think it's a policy thing. I think policy-wide, policy level, we've been pushing inclusion or the idea, the conceptualization of inclusion, without really having an understanding of what inclusion could mean, you know. And by could, I mean, I think it has a lot more potential than it currently is using. And so again, I think we move past this belief that all integrated activities provide experiences understood to be inclusive. And rather, I think we should be discussing activities with persons with disabilities to see if the experiences are inclusive. And then we can move from there. We can pivot, you know, we can be molded. Good teachers can change. In addition, I think we should place feelings of being included above feeling like we are including. And so I spoke with, this is a story that's always fresh in my mind. I spoke with a faculty member recently, and I asked her, why did you get into adapted PE? I'm not going to tell you who she was, but I asked her, why did you get into adapted PE? And she told me the story, and the story was about the feelings that she had when she was working with children with disabilities. And I thought to myself, should this be the focus of why we're doing this? Like, should it be the feelings I'm having that should be driving what I'm doing as a teacher or as a faculty member or as a researcher? Or should it be the feelings that the students are having in the educational context that I'm creating? And like, this is something that I struggle with quite a bit thinking about. And it's something that I share with other people because perhaps this is something you think about as well. So should I be placing my own feeling that I'm doing good work for other people, which is that altruism idea, or should I be placing their feelings above my own and working toward enhancing their feelings? I think also to improve educational experiences, we have the moral responsibility to question and problematize concerns related to inclusion and the inclusiveness of settings. I think the more we just accept inclusion for what it is and what people tell us it is, I think the worse off our students are. But I've said this over and over again, so I think we can move past a bit quicker. And so here are my closing remarks, which I always like to have a little closure because I think it provides mental closure for everybody that's part of the presentation. One is that I think we should dispel the common belief that inclusion is achieved by implementing inclusive strategies without ongoing input from those being included. I think there's a lot of value in that bag of tricks, which is the inclusive strategies piece. And again, I think people have huge bags of tricks and know a lot of different accommodations and modifications and activities. And I have a ton of respect for the people who have that bag of tricks. But I don't think that bag of tricks has value unless we also talk to the people in the class about what it's like to go through those classes. I also think we should dismiss the notion that feeling included can only happen in integrated classes. I think we look at things like reverse mainstream classes or self-contained classes or disability sport programs, adapted sport programs. Unified PE is something that's contentious right now nationally that Special Olympics runs, but you know what? We don't know if kids feel included in those programs. Perhaps they do. I've spoken with a few people at Unified PE to start getting the ball rolling to ask those questions about that program. I think examining how people with disabilities experience our instruction can help us develop more effective educational strategies. I think that's obvious based on the last 87 minutes that we've spent together. And I hope that by considering the previous experiences of people with disabilities and reflecting on our own teaching, this exercise is helpful with us developing our teaching strategies moving forward. And again, I can't tell you guys what to teach. I don't have that bag of tricks that you all have, just more so ways to think about teaching and why we make decisions the way we do when teaching. I also, I've said this to a lot of teachers at this point, and one of them is Brad Weiner. I'm not sure if his name is recognizable to all of you, but he was the National APE Teacher of the Year back in 2012 or something of that nature. He's actually joining Virginia's APE teacher crew this upcoming fall. I'm not sure if this is something I have the right to share, but I'm going to. Brad is joining Fairfax County, I believe, this upcoming fall, which is exciting. Yeah, he's wonderful. And so I was speaking to him about these concepts, and he went ahead and created an entire website based around these concepts and created resources that support it, including ways to talk to kids, to ask them their feelings. And I'm not going to dive too much into it because we've only got 2 minutes left, but when you get the slides, I would strongly encourage you to check it out. Brad is definitely helpful in moving some of these conceptual ideas to practice, which I really appreciate. And so we have time for questions. We have 1 minute, 57 seconds of reflection time left. And then also here's my contact info, including my email address and my Twitter handle. You can also just come to my office if you want. If you're in Norfolk, just pop by. I'm usually here from 7 a.m. to about 5 p.m. every day because I really love to work. But yeah, is there any questions that you all would like to talk about before I get booted out of here?
Hello, I would just like to say that the presentation has gone very well. It has definitely met my expectations and beyond, and continue your search. And I know years ago, I was passionate about this very topic, about what is it that the children need and giving them the voice. So I'm so glad to see that it has reached higher academia. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Andre. Your name looks incredibly familiar. I feel like we've met more than one time before.
Yes, we have. I was just doing a lot of moving around and I didn't want to make anyone dizzy.
Now I recognize you with your camera on.
Yes. All right, look forward to speaking with you about other topics.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I know everyone joins me in thanking Dr. Hagel. Justin, thank you so much. What a great presentation, very interactive. Jillian just put the link to the Google Drive in the chat again, and we'll share the today's survey for this first session. So if you guys can fill that out, we'll provide feedback to Justin afterwards, because it's always good as a presenter to know how your information was received. But personally, I was mesmerized and I really enjoyed this presentation. So I thank you very much for your time today, Justin.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. And you please call on me, anybody, anytime I could be helpful. That's what academia exists for, is to help teachers. So like, please come, let me know. I'm happy to. And thank you, Sheila and Jillian, for the invite. I know a few years ago you invited me and I couldn't make it. But please keep me in mind in the future if you think stuff like this would be helpful again.
I actually may ask you to take a look at social development SOLs because you had mentioned how important inclusion could be there. So if you're at all interested, I can share the document if you have any feedback.
Yeah, sounds like fun.
We love to have more eyes on it. We have a robust committee, but always good to hear what your perspective is.
Usually it's a space cadet perspective.
We like that though. That's what I like about you. We have good conversations. Okay, everyone, it is break time. If you want to stay on, I think Justin has offered a little